What is the most scariest but still unexplained thing that you have experienced?
The flight accident that didn't happen to me and several others in the Army. I was flying Hueys for the Army supporting the Ranger School in the Georgia mountains in fall of 1978. At the end of a morning mission, I was on the controls flying down from the mountains to Camp Frank D. Merrill, LZ, northwest of Dahlonega, GA. I was relaxed and looking forward to refueling and returning to Font Benning, now Fit Moore, that afternoon. Something started bothering me, and I couldn't put my finger on it. After about a minute, I knew something was badly wrong with the aircraft and that we needed to land. The instruments were all normal. There was no unusual sound or vibration. The controls all handled normally, with no binding or sticking or play. As I had only about 450 hours of flight time, I alerted the other pilot, 3,000 hours, warrant officer, and asked him to take the controls to check things out. I thought that I might be imagining things, especially as a trained engineer. I couldn't identify anything that would lead to my feeling. He didn't believe me when I said something was wrong with the helicopter. He played around with it for a minute or so, said, "The bird is good," and handed the controls back to me. As soon as I got back on the controls, the feeling that the aircraft was bad came back, that something was really wrong. I declared an emergency landing and told the other pilot to call FEP Benning Flight Ops on our UHF radio and give them the coordinates of this little two-helicopter clearing for. I could see on a gentle slope, we're putting down right there, and to contact the Camp Merrill Aviation Liaison on the local VHF in case something went bad during the landing. We landed, and after the rotors stopped turning, I immediately climbed up top and looked at the rotor hub. The longitudinal bearing that transmitted pitch information to the blades had failed. Instead of having less than few thousandths of an inch of play, it had over 1/4 inch. The other pilot blanched when I asked him to take a look. A maintenance bird that arrived about 5 to 6 hours later with a test pilot and TI. The test pilot took a look, blanched, and asked the other pilot how he knew there was a problem. He pointed at me and said, "I didn't find it. I thought the bird was good. Lieutenant My Last Name said the bird was bad and we needed to land immediately." The maintenance test pilot asked me how I knew. I told him the truth. I have no idea. I just knew that we needed to land right away. He didn't believe me, insisting I must have heard or seen or felt something. The other pilot said, "No, he's telling the truth. I couldn't feel anything either." The crew chief also said he didn't detect anything. The maintenance test pilot said, "You are the luckiest guys alive. You should have been dead already. That bearing should have flown apart. You should have lost the rotor blades, all control of the aircraft, and been a ball of torn metal on the sides of a mountain." To this day, I still have no idea why or how I knew. It wasn't a little voice whispering in my ear or anything like that. It was just a feeling of really bad badness, the best I can describe it. And yeah, we both inspected that same bearing during the mission pre-flight. It was completely normal then. Myself, the other pilot, the crew chief, and possibly some of the Ranger cadre we'd ferried about should have died on that day. We didn't for no reason that I can put my finger on, even now.
Not scary or life-threatening, lol, but I had a similar I just know experience when I got pregnant the second time. I knew it was twins. There was nothing out of the ordinary, but I described it to people as being the same as just knowing you have 2 legs. Finally, to prove me wrong, my midwife sent me for an early scan at 8 weeks pregnant. Sure enough, baby had brought along a pal.
I wonder if it sounded just ever so different, given the extra play it had, and you picked up on the sound, but were looking for a physical sensation instead, so didn't realize it.
No, there was no difference in sound. I don't know if this makes sense to anyone who isn't an aviator, but when I was aware something was wrong, sound was one of the things I was looking for, along with feel as I manipulated the controls. You'd be surprised how acutely aware we were of how things sounded. Even a little difference in the whopping sound a Huey made was noticeable, or the whir when at flat pitch on the ground. Any sound difference at all would have been picked up by either pilot or the crew chief, especially the crew chief, since he flew every flight with his bird.
I got chills reading this. Glad everyone came out of that unharmed. and thanks for sharing.
Sure. We had so many close calls of different kinds that at one point I asked for the accident statistics in Army aviation. The answer I got back was the major accident rate is 2.5% per year for active aviators. And that was for peacetime. Nobody shooting at you. No combat pressure to get the mission done. I realized that even if you were the perfect pilot, that since there were two of you, the other guy could make a mistake, and the margins for the type of flying we did were so thin that even a small mistake or error could get you. As it was, I survived a major crash when the other guy made a mistake. At that point, I said to myself, flying helicopters is a lot of fun, but it isn't that much fun. I gotta get out of this. But make no mistake, tactical flying in helicopters is massively fun, and you can literally get addicted to the adrenaline.
Really interesting. Do you think for some reason you were able to pick up on high-frequency vibrations caused by the bearing failing when you were at the controls that the other pilot didn't pick up on, and they triggered such a response in you?
The answer will forever be maybe. I wondered about that specific thing in the moment at the time this was happening. Remember that I didn't know there was a bearing failure in the control linkages. I did think at the time, am I hearing something? But in the moment, I couldn't say that I was. My experience up to that point, and afterwards for hundreds of more flight hours, was that the high-time aviators, all of which had significant combat experience in Vietnam, had incredible skill and knowledge, more than I ever did. I've always thought, and still do, that as there was anything to hear, they'd have heard it or noticed it before me, especially when I first brought it up and asked the other pilot to take the controls as a cross-check. One problem with the sound or vibration theory is that the frequency wouldn't be high. The Huey rotor revolved at 330 RPM, and the bearing was going through cycles of main rotor blade pitch changes at that rate.
The night before my birthday in 1996, I dreamed that I was walking around near the peak of Everest. It was snowing hard, but I was quite comfortable. There was a tent. To announce my presence, I sang Goober Peas. The two men inside were frightened, and I tried to calm and cheer them. I stayed with them a while and comforted them. A few years later, I read about the Everest disaster in which mountaineers had to pitch a tent too high on Everest and died there the night before my birthday in 1996. I can't explain it, but I hope I comforted them.
My father is very religious. He does not believe in ghosts, aliens, anything supernatural, or out of the ordinary. To this day, if this story is brought up, he will quickly find something else to talk about. My dad, younger brother, and I were at my family's hunting camp, sleeping in the small trailer together on bunk beds. It was the day after Christmas, and it was chilly outside, so we got to bed early to wake up for hunting. In the middle of the night, my dad wakes up and starts screaming like he's being attacked. He then immediately began sobbing. This is the only time I've seen or heard my father cry. When he calmed down, his terrified sons asked what happened. He said he'd had a terrible nightmare about an endless surge of water that was sweeping families away and drowning children. I recall he said those words specifically. To have my dad tell me about a dream was strange in and of itself. You must understand all of this was completely out of character. Finally, I asked if we drowned in his dream because, at this point, I was sure there was some meaning to this vision. He said no, and that all of the people looked Chinese. Now, let me preface by saying we did not have internet access on our cell phones at this time, and we did not have any access to TV or news at our hunting property. Well, this was the morning of December 26, 2004. The very day, a massive earthquake struck Asia, triggering a tsunami that led to a devastating loss of life. I still believe in some kind of collective consciousness because of this event. How could I not?
This gave me chills because a similar thing happened to me during the 2011 tsunami that impacted Japan. The day it occurred, I was asleep, Eastern Standard Time. No TV or radio was on in my home, but I had a very vivid dream that I was on a beach. The architecture appeared Japanese, business signs were in Japanese, and everyone I saw was Asian in my dream. A large wave surged through everything. I remember trying to help a little girl, but couldn't. and we were both carried away. When I woke up in a cold sweat and went to work, people were talking about the tsunami. I've only shared this story with about 3 people because I feel others might think I'm imagining things or making it up.
This happened to me. I had a vivid, not unusual for me, dream about running frantically along a beach promenade, screaming to other people to run and trying desperately to cling to the benches, and huge waves crashed over us and receded. Then, getting up and sprinting again to the next point of safety where we could cling to something. When I woke up, I didn't recall the dream immediately, but walked into the living room where my parents were watching breaking news about the tsunami in Japan. And it struck me so intensely that I'd just seen something exactly like that. And the dream came rushing back.
It's very strange. You're the 3rd commenter who had a similar experience, and they all involve tsunamis in Asia. No idea what that means, but it's noteworthy.
Big catastrophes seem to trigger widespread premonitions. After the Aberfan disaster in 1966, when a landslide killed over 100 Welsh children and dozens of adults, hundreds of people reported having precognitive dreams about the tragedy. IIRC, some British psychologists even investigated the reports.
That supports my idea of a collective consciousness. It's comforting to me to know there may be more beyond our understanding.
Oh, I've had enough weird experiences in my 36 years that I am certain there are things out there in the world that are beyond our current scientific understanding. And maybe science will understand them eventually. Look at plate tectonics. That wasn't scientifically proven until the 1960s, but no one's ever doubted that earthquake and volcanoes exist, even when we didn't understand why.
This is a similar story with my aunt. She lives in Germany. She had a dream about people struggling in the water and became worried because my family was traveling to Phuket the next day. She called, but my mother told her we had already postponed our trip by 2 weeks because of my school schedule. Within that week, the tsunami in Phuket occurred. A significant number of lives were lost. My aunt only called us one other time with a warning. And she was right again. It was September 11.
My father experienced something similar. One day, he suddenly left a movie theater, saying he felt an overwhelming sense of people in distress. At the same time, if I recall correctly, a plane crashed into an apartment complex in Brazil. The first time something like this happened, he saw a woman leaving a hamburger restaurant and had a vivid vision of her in a terrible car accident, seemingly ejected from her VW van. Seeing her drive away in a VW van, he abandoned his meal and got in his car to follow her. When he caught up, the van had been in an accident, and someone was placing a jacket over her. For anyone who might think this ability is intriguing, it wasn't. He kept it hidden from almost everyone, and most of what I know came from my mother after he passed away. I'd heard whispers, but he never liked to talk about it. Big guy, college football player, doctor. He struggled emotionally and drank every night for the last 30 years of his life. He said it was the only thing that brought him peace.
What's kind of weird is that I had some similar-ish thing happen, but not with world events, but with family. I'd have dreams with some of relatives, mainly like grandma and stuff, and I'd find out the next day they passed away. It doesn't happen often, I guess, thankfully, lol, but it would sometimes linger in the back of my head, because I'm worried whoever I dream about relative, they may die or something. But it only happened with grandparents who were in their 70s to 90s. Not really sure why this is. Could be grandparents saying a final goodbye. Could be a weird coincidence where I have dreams of family members all the times, and it is just coincidence that I attach my grandparents to the day they pass away. But yeah, kinda weird that your dad weirdly dreamt that prior to the tsunami.
It gives me hope that something exists beyond our realm of understanding.
Yeah, part of me kind of aligns with the idea of reincarnation. Part of me also kind of hopes death is the key unlocking the 4th dimension or something. I also have this weird reincarnation type theory where our consciousness or soul isn't like one solid person or being, but rather a collection. Like when we die, as our body disintegrates, be it burial or cremation, as our body gets reused into earth, our consciousness or soul gets reused via a collective of other soul as a new kid is born. But there are days where I'm such a nihilist, where I think, nah, things just come and go. Who really knows?
Man, I hold a very similar belief. I think we are part of a collective consciousness that we all return to when we die. But someone once asked me, do you remember what it was like before you were born? The answer is no. And if that's what it's like when we die, I guess I'm okay with that.
This is a powerful story. Thank you for sharing it. I also believe in some sort of collective conscience because of several dreams about other people, only to learn the next day that the dream events are related to a real situation. For example, once I had a vivid dream about a specific person in my neighborhood sobbing. It turns out he was up all night with his dying dog.
I had spent the night at a friend's house. We just drank and played video games. We woke up the next morning, and she said she had the weirdest dream about being in a city, and the tallest of tall buildings are on fire and just melting. She talked about how vivid it was. We turned on the TV about the time the second plane hit on 9/11. We both just stared, jaws on the floor. She never wanted to talk about it after that. If I brought it up, she would loudly change the subject.
There are billions of people on this planet. Every night, it's likely thousands upon thousands of people dream about a tsunami happening, just by chance. If you think about the numbers, it's not even that much of a coincidence. People forget that on a planet of 8 billion people, a 1 in a million chance of something happening to a person means it's likely to happen 8,000 times a day. To the individual, it's wild, but statistically, it would be strange if it didn't happen. As humans, we are also vulnerable to confirmation bias, where we remember hits and forget misses. The endless dreams I have that don't come true are discarded, whilst the one that does becomes a family legend.
I agree. I've often wondered if it was a coincidence. But the way it affected my dad, and hearing the news of what had happened that day, a few days later, was too much for me to write off. Still, of course, it could be a simple coincidence.
In 1989, I was driving on a familiar rural highway in broad daylight. I was rounding an easy bend and shocked to see a small town on the right side of the road. There's a sign, St. Vincent. A few of the things immediately noticeable were a shop called Webster Welding, an old-fashioned horse-drawn water pump for firefighting, several large poplars with dead tops, and black and white painted rocks along the street that faced the highway. I kept watching in the rear-view mirror, and it stayed visible. I drive a few miles, and there is a gentleman waving at me from beside his car. He's obviously broken down, and I pulled over. A quick chat, and I learn he's blown a tire and wrecked his rim. He asks if I'll drive him back to the town. No problem. In he gets, and off we go. The town is not there. It's a dusty Alberta crossroad. This fellow and I just sat in my truck in silence. I raised an arm, and my hair was standing on end. His too. He said all the trees were dead. Are we dead? Eventually, I drove him to a nearby town. He simply got out of the truck and walked away. I remember it like it was yesterday. I could tell you what that town looked like in perfect detail.
Wow, that's so creepy. Have you looked up St. Vincent since? I'm also from AB and saw it on Google Maps. Is it anything like you remember?
Look on Google Maps and find the Genesee Power Plant. There's an abandoned gas station to the south on the left of the highway. When I saw St. Vincent, it was on the next intersection to the south and right of that. Edit. The guy I picked up was just before the Hutterite colony.
This one freaked me out. So both of you registered, there was a town there, then the town was gone. And you both were so endowed with fear you spent the rest of the ride in silence, and then they just left? What?
Yes, exactly. We both saw it, but him much earlier than myself because he had blown a tire. That point was key to not really talking to each other. Whatever had happened, our visions of the town were 50 minutes apart.
Much less creepy, but your story reminded me of this encounter. I was driving with my sister in West Texas at night. I missed a turn, but the roads formed a triangle, so I just waited for the next turn that would end up in the same place. On the second leg of the triangle, we found a car that had hit a deer and damaged it beyond use. I believe the man waved us down, but I don't remember really. Stopping at all sounds crazy to me now, but helping people was pretty normal before cell phones were so common. This was 2005-ish. So we drove the man and his wife into town where they had a motel room. I remember the woman fell asleep in our car on the way, so she must have been really tired. It didn't occur to me until much later that we only found them because of the missed turn. It was incredibly desolate, and there may not have been another car pass by until morning. I believe they had already been there for several hours.